So first story tonight is going to be that Julian kind of warned us all. And I found this
Julian.
story. Julian. Julian. All right. I found this story over in I don't even remember. LA Progressive, which was picked up on
Hmm.
Monday of last week. And the headline says censorship by proxy, how big tech is censoring even the global news platforms. Wait, come on. Restrictions on
No.
yep. But like they're talking about the AP and Reuters even like getting censored and funneled. Okay. Okay. Restrictions on freedom of information by
Oh.
corporations beyond government censorship to serve corporate, government, or other interests. And what's funny is Mickey Huff and Andy Lee Roth. I just thought that the names just David Lee Roth and there's got to
Yep.
be some that's Mickey Roth, Hart from the Grateful Dead. It's just hit me funny. Anyway, so, despite the boundless access to info, Silicon Valley mirrors legacy media in its consolidated ownership and privileging of elite narratives. New class of billionaire oligarchs owns or controls the most popular media platforms, including the companies often referred to as the FANGs, as we well know. But now it's not really FANGs because Meta and Alphabet, it's like MAAN. MAAAN, right? So that's
Mm-hmm.
Meta, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Alphabet for those who are on the podcast. Their CEOs are routinely lionized in popular culture and the press as intrepid entrepreneurs, inventors of today's must have tools for work and play, and stewards of the public square. They include, but are not limited to, of course, we know Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg and Jeff Bezos, and all are deeply involved and invested in computer software, social media platforms, and the World Wide Web itself, right? So, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which we've covered extensively, Bill Gates has provided over $300 million to fund news outlets, journalism centers, and training programs, press associations, and specific media campaigns around the world. Zuckerberg.
Well, this is
Mhm.
not to
No?
derail too much. Biden recently talked about during his me and Colin covered it a little bit. His like olive branch to Africa. He's given money to like connect Microsoft with African countries. Essentially, it was
Yes.
like very Charles Schwaby sort of stuff.
Hmm.
So,
Sure. I believe that. So
speaking of
Of course, Mark
Bill
Mark
Gates,
Mark Robot Zuckerberg, and in the name of combating online misinformation, of course, we know he hired fact checkers from the Atlantic Council, which is a NATO lobby group, and he stifled and deplatformed countless independent news voices, mostly those critical of U.S. foreign policy, official narratives of COVID, and other controversial issues, specifically, of course, around Israel as well. And they don't want to talk about Israel, Palestine. Thanks, Mark. Let's get back to this. Resembling previous generations of billionaires who own legacy media outlets, today's digital tech titans blur the lines between journalism, entertainment, consumption of goods and information. They increasingly partner with the military industrial complex, as we know, in service of national security and state surveillance. We know Bezos and Microsoft have got tons of government contracts. They also aim to collect and monetize any available information about the people who use their platforms. Yes, and as critics, including Shoshana Zuboff and Alan McLeod, Nolan Higdon, have noted, big tech billionaires harvest and exploit our online data for profit, political influence, social control. Power dynamics Zuboff calls surveillance capitalism. Again, I don't think I'm covering anything from this article that we're not very familiar with in our realm. But I want to still lay this out because we still have to establish this for the people kind of as a baseline that this still is happening. That in the process,
mm,
big tech giants and their oligarchic owners now engage in a new type of censorship, which we've called censorship by proxy. This is interesting. Censorship by proxy describes restrictions on freedom of information undertaken by private corporations that exceed limits on governmental censorship and serve both corporate and government or third party interests. Censorship by proxy is not subject to venerable First Amendment prescriptions or on government interference with freedom of speech or freedom of the press. It's private, again, terms of service type of shit. Censorship by proxy alerts us to the power of economic entities that are not normally recognized as gatekeepers. For example, in 2022, and we covered this too, the digital financial service PayPal whose, of course, founders include Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, froze the accounts of Consortium
Yep.
News and Mint Press. By the way, Indie Media Award honorees, some of the best outlets out there that absolutely report on corruption and are uncorrupted themselves for unspecified
Yeah,
offenses,
they do good
for
stuff.
quote, unspecified offenses and quote, risks associated with their accounts, meaning they're affiliated with Palestine and they report on Israel's crimes. A
Yep.
ruling that prevented both independent news outlets from using funds maintained by PayPal. Now, the thing with Consortium News was because Robert Parry had passed away and they hadn't filled out certain paperwork. They're still holding, I believe, about $13,000 of Joe Loria's money. I mean, people have donated over the years to Consortium News using PayPal. It's a terrible story. I don't believe they still have the money out. So, Consortium News and Mint Press have each filed critical news stories and commentary on the foreign policy objectives of the U.S. and NATO. Like I said, PayPal issued notices to each news outlet stating that in addition to suspending their accounts, it might also seize their assets for damages. Fuck out of here. Yeah, that's for real. Like I said, Joe Loria said he believed this was a case of ideological policing. Nar Adley, who I've also had emails with, she's terrific, head of Minpress News, warned the sanctions regime war is coming home to hit the bank accounts of watchdog journalists. Absolutely. Sadly. But
Yep.
PayPal's freeze on the accounts of Minpress and Consortium wasn't even the most glaring example of censorship by proxy in the past year. Instead, that dishonor goes to big tech platforms and media companies that launched a massive campaign of online censorship in the fateful aftermath of Russia's attack on Ukraine in early 2022. Now, this is where I start to diverge from this article in their take and the author's take on on the strategic military operation that's happening in Ukraine, that the provocation by the U.S. that led up to this. And I'm going to read some things that I don't agree with, but was written by the authors, and I wanted it out there because I wanted to be able to challenge it and discuss it, but also to lay it out and not censor them because these are their words. So, of course, DirecTV, Roku, Sling, and Dish each dropped RT America from their platforms in protest against the Russian invasion. In the name of fighting alleged Russian propaganda and disinformation, and following the lead of the EU, YouTube disappeared the entire Russian channels, including RT America and Sputnik. And those channels archives to great applause from various sectors of the American public, especially liberals. I guess I don't know how many people were celebrating that they took down Redacted Tonight's entire library and Chris Hedges. Really, I mean, they laughed.
I mean, definitely a few. I mean, it depends on the exact people he's mentioning there.
You know what? I
Like,
guess
not all liberals, but like
I
a
did.
select few, definitely.
You know what? I did drop the rest of the article and what they're talking about, and they call Putin a dictator, and you know, everybody's it's really
Everybody's bad. Hate
everybody's
everyone.
bad.
Don't trust anyone.
Yep. But that he's also censoring, and that he is, yes, everyone's bad effectively. But I also wanted to, in that vein, remind everyone that this came out of Media Lens, and this was our, you know, Julian, free Julian. Nearly every war has been the result of media lies. Okay, speaking of specifically corporate media and Ukraine. And I think that these authors of the prior article, in their analysis or their breakdown, whatever you want to call it, you know, they were kind of spreading corporate media lies, and they may have knowingly or unknowingly done it. Now, they did provide some receipts about the fact that, you know, independent media and some of these independent outlets have been thrown out, that you can't say certain terms, you can't call it a war, and you can't speak out against it in Russia. And, you know, from all things we're hearing, that seems to be kind of accurate. So I don't know, but, you know, at the same time, I still think that that's well overblown and still part of a propaganda campaign. And from the people that I trust, I'm being told that. So Julian Assange once observed, of course, that nearly every war has been the result of media lies. For daring to publish evidence of war crimes, U.S. war crimes, Assange now sits in the high security Belmarsh prison in London, at risk of being extradited to the U.S. within the next few weeks. Prospects for a fair trial range from minuscule to zero. That's generous.
Mm-hmm.
In a recent interview, WikiLeaks editor-in-chief Kristen Hernafson, he's the current person running WikiLeaks, told U.S. journalist, of course, Glenn Greenwald, that legal avenues in London to challenge Assange's unlawful extradition were being exhausted. What's needed now is not recourse to a legal system that is subservient to power, but a political fight, as he explained. Quote, in my perception, and I've been sitting on all the proceedings in London, all the extradition proceedings in London have exposed only one thing, and that's the fact that this is just not going to be won in a court. Okay, there's no justice to be had in courtrooms in London. That's obvious, and I don't have to mention the United States. That's one of the essences of the defense in fighting the extradition, that he'll never be able to get a fair trial there. So we're running out of time. We need to push this on a different level. And so he decided that we needed to go on tour to shore up political support, because the only way to fight a political persecution is through political means. The Guardian and recently joined with the New York Times, Le Monde, and all the other mainstream media papers in publishing an open letter calling on President Biden to end Assange's persecution. About 3 years too late, and after they'd smeared him and dragged him through the mud and used his work in the process, but okay, we'll take it. It's been 10 years since Assange sought refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London after being dragged from the embassy by police in April 2019 in exchange for an IMF loan for, I believe it was $5.4 billion. Misty goes through the entire thing at the beginning of every action for Assange.
Yep.
Julian's been locked up in the harsh regime of Belmarsh prison, suffering from failing physical mental health. Indeed, according to the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Nils Melzer, Assange is literally a victim of torture. We know this. In 2020, the prestigious medical journal The Lancet published a letter from Doctors for Assange with 216 signatories from 33 countries, drawing urgent attention to the ongoing torture and medical neglect. So he warned us about this, and this is what they're doing to him. Political writer Thomas Scripps noted that the open letter from 5 newspapers, of course, makes clear that he's been the victim of a monstrous campaign of state persecution, costing him years of his life, good health, for revealing state criminality designed to set a chilling example for others. And it has. Some do it in the face of that, but some, there's tons of people I think that would, and they're afraid to, for family's sake, for all different kinds of job and extra, being kind of cast out from society for that kind of stuff. We're kind of the misfits. We don't really care about this stuff, but tons of people do. What took them so long to speak out? The conduct of these newspapers, of course, over the past decade has been thoroughly reprehensible. Their efforts to poison public opinion against him, give credence to the false claims and accusations made against him, facilitated the American state's persecution of this principled and courageous journalist. On top of the fact that they never correct the lies, that they never print the updates, that they didn't properly follow and cover the Belmarsh trial, and the Old Bailey trial, like Richard did. Holy moly! Australian journalist John Pilger, legend, who's done so much to raise public awareness of Assange's plight, was scathing. And this is a much longer article, again, than I even broke up here. I had to grab a portion of it, but John Pilger just kills it. The editors of Guardian, Times, etc. finally speak up for Assange. Weasel words in 10 years late. I said 3 years late. He's 10 years after the Guardian made public WikiLeaks' secret password and launched a campaign of vilification against the truth teller to cover their own ass. He added, the Guardian, which has played a major role in the persecution of Julian Assange, is now scurrying for cover with a call for him to be freed. But even its weasel statement repeats a line fiction about his failure to redact files. Correct. Pilger was referring to the oft-repeated smear that the WikiLeaks co-founder recklessly endangered the lives of informants when publishing information that exposed U.S. war crimes. In fact, Assange was extremely careful in redacting names, and he was effectively thrown to the wolves by both the Guardian and the New York Times, and a guy by the name of David Lee, a writer by the name of David Lee. That's the guy that deserves to be rotting in Belmarsh right now. How do we know this? Award-winning Australian journalist Mark Davis was an eyewitness to the preparation of the Afghan war logs in 2010 for newspaper publication, documented in Davis's film Inside WikiLeaks. Davis spoke at a public meeting in Sydney in 2019, said he was present alongside Assange at the Guardian's bunker, where a team from Guardian, New York Times, Der Spiegel worked on the publication of articles based on, as New York Times put it, quote, a 6-year archive of classified military documents that offers an unvarnished ground-level picture of the war in Afghanistan that is, in many respects, more grim than the official portrayal. Davis attested that far from being cavalier about releasing documents that might endanger lives, it was Guardian journalists who neglected and appeared to care little about redacting the documents. Again, a man by the name of David Lee. David Lee. Say his name. Put him in prison instead of the guy that's sitting there. Nobody should be in prison for journalism. But if anybody's going to do it, if anybody's going to do it for publishing the secret key, it shouldn't be Julian Assange. Because he took every step that there was to protect it. And this moron actually published it. Moreover, they had a graveyard humor about people being harmed. No one, he stated emphatically, expressed concern about civilian casualties, except Julian. On top of the fact that all of this, we know, is just a persecution to get to Julian in the first place. As Oscar Grenfell explained in a piece for WSWS, shout out to Oscar and those guys. David Lee, like I said, and Nick Davies, senior Guardian journalists who worked closely with Julian in the publication of the logs, have repeatedly claimed that Assange was indifferent to the consequences of the publication. That's a lie. These Guardian claims were pivotal in corporate media smears against Assange. They were also crucial in the U.S. government claims that publication aided the enemy, which, of course, it didn't. However, noted Grenfell, in reality, U.S. and Australian militaries have been compelled to admit that the release of the Afghan war logs did not result in a single individual coming to physical harm.
Yep.
Not just killed, but any physical harm whatsoever. As Scripps points out, the open letter is evidence that even the 5 newspapers, including Guardian, were well aware from the start that Assange was functioning as a journalist innocent of any crime. Yet, why speak out now, 10 years too late? The likely concern is that a U.S. show trial would expose the newspaper's own nefarious role in providing cover for U.S. war crimes, as well as enabling the persecution of Julian, which they already have. There's already another vital element in the timing, as he wrote. Quote, the exposure of U.S. war crimes would come at a time when the U.S. is expanding its proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, sold to the public on the grounds that the U.S. intervention is necessary to prevent Russian atrocities. And because the public despises the corporate media, is vital for state and corporate power. The public trust in the news media, a key conduit for carrying and amplifying Western propaganda, does not collapse entirely. So, bury the evidence. In the U.S., trust in the news has fallen to a historic low. Right? We know this. That's why we're doing what we're doing, and we're kicking the crap out of everybody. Amazingly enough. I mean, in our world, I mean, we are reaching people that have completely unplugged from corporate media, and God bless you all. The percentage of Americans who say they have a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in newspapers has fallen to 16%. For TV news, it's even lower at 11%. So in response to these findings, Glenn was blunt. Of course, check out Nick, Socialist MMA, on Glenn this week. He was killer. But Glenn said,
Yep.
The public despises the corporate media. There is almost nobody held in lower esteem or who's more distrusted and abhorred than liberal employees of large media corporations. Nobody wants to hear from them, so in-group arrogance is all they have left. Kinda, yeah. Yep. So John Pilger also pointed out, he pointed to the ongoing tsunami of propaganda about Ukraine, which is something he's never seen before, including even the lies told about Iraq in the run-up to the 2003 invasion, which is remarkable. But they have a conduit to go directly into your brain. You don't have to turn on the TV anymore. When it comes to opposing views or informed views on Ukraine, none of them have been allowed in by the corporate media, he says. And as for Guardian and its coverage of foreign affairs, we have some people now who are an absolute disgrace, especially on the reporting of Ukraine and Russia. Yes, 100%. The Independent carried a rare dose of sanity last week. You know, they're completely owned by the Saudi royal family and their propaganda rag. When it permitted a piece by Mary Dejevsky, all right, she's formerly the newspaper's foreign correspondent in Moscow. She observed the informed view that Western provocations had played a major role in precipitating the Ukraine war is virtually absent from news coverage. How about that? Specific factors that are routinely ignored by the BBC and other major news outlets include, here we go, post-Cold War triumphalism, the green light for former East Bloc states to join NATO despite what Russia understood to have been promises to the contrary, the 2004 ousting of Ukraine's democratically elected president, which Russia saw as a U.S.-inspired coup, and the ways the West subsequently drew Ukraine into the Western Bloc, with the EU Association Agreement on and NATO military assistance, even as it abrogated Cold War arms control treaties one after one or allowed them to lapse. You've got to look at it from the other perspective, and they just refuse to because it's inconvenient to them and to the defense contractors. Consideration of such facts matter, she noted, because without understanding why Russia invaded, there can be no understanding of what will be needed for a lasting peace. Because they don't want that. They want Afghanistan 2.0. They want a 20-year war. And then the legendary Jeffrey Sachs, an economist and foreign policy analyst, also the chair of the Lancet study on COVID.
Did you see?
Yes.
I think it was Joe. Might have been Turncoat. But his, like, Jeffrey Sachs reacts to Jimmy Dore, like, Jimmy starts going off, and Jeffrey Sachs is like, ooh, ooh, ooh. It's like,
maybe we'll have to show that.
It's like a bit.
Some stuff, I think that was Joe, STFU Shitlib2 on Twitter, at STFU Shitlib2, as long as Elon lets him stay on. But Jeffrey Sachs was telling Amy Goodman of Democracy Now!, who, of course, we're not huge fans of here, but she occasionally gets it right, though. She's even been a simp for the intel state. Quote, I think both sides see that there's no military way out. Speaking of NATO and Ukraine on one side and Russia on the other. He's the most honest man in news, honestly. This war, like von Clausewitz told us 2 centuries ago, is politics by other means, or with other means, meaning that there are political issues at stake here, and those are what need to be negotiated. He points out that the urgent need for war not to escalate, perhaps towards nuclear Armageddon, literally, demands that the issue of NATO expansion be negotiated immediately, adding, quote, there are other issues as well, but the point is this war needs to end because it's a disaster for everybody. It's a threat to the whole world. According to EU President Ursula von der Leyen last week, 100,000 Ukrainian soldiers have died, 20,000 civilians, and then the war continues. And so this is an utter disaster. And we've not searched for the political solution because they don't want to give an inch to Putin whatsoever. To return to Julian, though, the need for independent media that serve the public and scrutinize power has thus never been greater. And that's why I brought this article up. It kind of dovetails nicely into what we do a little bit. The pattern of the media calling for one war after another, as media analyst, the legend, Indie Media Award honoree Alan McLeod highlighted in a recent tweet, is persistent and abhorrent. Quote, bombing Iraq isn't enough. Bomb North Korea before it's too late. Quote, bomb Syria even if it's illegal. To stop Iran's bomb Iran. I mean, and so on it goes. This media promoted war fever, whose primary beneficiary is the Western military intelligence industrial complex, the Mickey Mat, as our friend Glory Jones likes to call him once in a while, must end for the sake of humanity. Yes. Let's go back to the legendary Julian. If we have a good media environment, then we will also have a peaceful environment. You're here to that.